Elara Vance was a widow. That was the first and final word on her in the town of Prosperity Gulch. Her existence was defined by an absence, a space left by her late husband Elias. She lived on a small parcel of land 2 miles out, where the valley floor began to climb into the granite shoulders of the mountains. Her possessions were few: a small, sturdy cabin, a sway-backed horse named Jasper, a dozen chickens, and 3 shelves of her husband's books and journals. It was in these journals that the trouble began. Elias had not been a man of Prosperity Gulch. He was an outsider, a geologist and engineer from the old country, a place of harder winters and deeper knowledge. His journals were not diaries of feeling, but ledgers of fact. They held 20 years of meticulous observations: barometric pressures, soil temperatures at varying depths, migration patterns of geese, the thickness of bark on the north side of pine trees. He had filled pages with complex equations, cross-referencing geological strata with historic weather cycles. Elara, a quiet student of her quiet husband, had learned to read them not as numbers, but as a language. In the spring of that year, she read a prophecy. The signs were all there, aligning in the journals and in the world outside her window. The late thaw, the unusual silence of the insects, the way the deep well water tasted of minerals leached from stone. Elias's final entry, written in a weak hand, was not a farewell. It was a warning. It described the preconditions for a 100-year winter, a season of mythic violence that he believed the valley was geologically and meteorologically primed to experience. So Elara Vance, the widow, made a plan. It was a plan born of her husband's science and her own practical resolve. She would build a shelter. Not a house of wood and nails, but a larder of stone and earth. A living space dug into the north face of the great granite tor that marked the edge of her property. It would be an earth-sheltered structure, using the planet's own thermal mass to regulate its temperature against any storm the sky could create. On the 1st of May, she walked into town. She went to the office of Mayor Thompson, a man whose family had founded Prosperity Gulch, and who believed progress was measured in board feet and railroad ties. She laid a single, hand-drawn schematic on his desk. "I need a permit," she said, her voice clear and low. "For excavation." Mayor Thompson picked up the drawing. He squinted at the simple lines, depicting a doorway cut into a rock face, with a long, buried chamber behind it. "What in God's name is this, Elara?" "It's a root cellar," she said, "and a storm shelter." "A storm shelter? In a rock?" He chuckled, a wheezing sound. "Woman, your cabin has stood for 50 years. It will stand for 50 more. "The coming winter will be different," she stated simply. The mayor leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning in protest. He looked at her with a kind of pitying condescension. "Elias filled your head with all sorts of strange notions, did he not? Geology, earth cycles." He waved a dismissive hand. "This is a town of common sense, Elara. We build with timber. We trust in solid foundations and steep roofs to shed the snow. We don't go burrowing into the ground like gophers." He slid the drawing back across the desk. "There's no permit for this because no sane person has ever asked for one. Go home. Tend your chickens." Elara looked at him. Her gaze was steady, unblinking. She took her drawing, folded it once, and left without another word. The story was all over town by noon. It was told first in the general store, then in the saloon, and finally from porch to porch. The quiet widow Vance had lost her mind. She wanted to dig a cave, a tomb. Silas Croft, the wealthiest rancher in the county, held court in the saloon that afternoon. He was a big man with a booming laugh, a man who believed in the power of new money and modern materials. He was in the process of building a magnificent new barn, a testament to his success. It was a gleaming structure of corrugated steel with a vast, unsupported roof span designed by an engineer from the city. "A Burrow!" he roared, slamming his fist on the bar. "The widow's Burrow! She thinks she's a badger!" The men around him laughed. The name stuck. Dr. Hemlock offered his professional opinion at the Mercantile, speaking loudly enough for all to hear. "It's a prescription for disease," he declared, adjusting his spectacles. "Living in the damp earth. It invites consumption, ague, all manner of bronchial afflictions. Human beings are meant for sunlight and fresh air, not for holes in the ground." He tapped his temple knowingly. Grief does strange things to the female mind. The mockery coalesced into a town-wide phenomenon. Her project became a joke, a benchmark for foolishness. A new phrase entered the local lexicon. If a man embarked on a hopeless task, his friends would say he was digging a Vance. It meant wasting your life on madness. The town watched, and it judged, and it laughed. It was a cruel sort of entertainment, a way to reinforce their own shared conventional wisdom by singling out one who dared to defy it. They were a community of the sensible, and she was their solitary fool. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. We read every single one. And subscribe so you do not miss what happens when the winter she predicted finally arrives. Elara Vance was unmoved. She had not expected their help. She had not expected their understanding. She had expected only their scorn, and they had delivered it in abundance. On the 2nd of May, she began to work. She owned no modern equipment. She had her own 2 hands, a set of Elias's tempered steel chisels, a sledgehammer, a wheelbarrow, and the steady, pulling strength of her horse, Jasper. The granite of the Tor was ancient and unforgiving. Her first task was to clear the earth and scree from the rock face she had chosen. It took her a week of digging and hauling, her muscles screaming with the unaccustomed strain. Then came the rock itself. She would drill for hours with a star drill and the sledgehammer, the rhythmic clang of steel on steel echoing in the silent air. It was a sound only she and Jasper could hear. Drill the hole. Pack it with fire clay. Insert a black powder charge with a long fuse. Light it and run. The blast would be a dull thump, a cough from the belly of the mountain. It would break loose just enough rock to fill her wheelbarrow a dozen times. She hauled the shattered granite away, using it to build a retaining wall that would one day hold back the earth for her sod roof. Day after day, the routine was the same. Drill, pack, blast, haul. The sun beat down on her. The spring turned to a hot, dry summer. Her hands, once soft, became calloused and hard. The skin on her face and arms darkened to the color of worn leather. She grew leaner, tougher. The soft lines of the widow were chiseled away, replaced by the hard angles of the laborer. The townspeople would sometimes ride out on a Sunday just to look. They would sit on their horses at a safe distance, watching the small, solitary figure swinging the sledgehammer. They would shake their heads, murmur to one another, and ride away, their own sanity comfortably reaffirmed. "She's still at it," they would report back in town. "Still digging a Vance." Jasper was her silent partner in the work. The old horse, patient and strong, would stand for hours, tethered in the shade of a lone pine. He would watch her, his ears twitching at the sound of the hammer. When it was time to move a larger boulder, she would rig a block and tackle, and Jasper would lean into the harness, pulling with a slow, steady power that never failed. She spoke to him as she worked, her voice a low murmur against the vast silence. "Just a bit more, old friend. This one is stubborn." He was her confidant, her beast of burden, her only companion in the great, lonely task. As she dug deeper into the hillside, the technical genius of Elias's design began to take shape. This was not a simple cave. She chiseled 2 ventilation shafts, angling them precisely upward through 20 feet of solid rock to emerge on the top of the tor. They were designed to create a natural convective loop, drawing fresh air in and pulling stale air out. She carved a deep drainage channel around the entire perimeter of the floor, filling it with graded gravel and river sand to create a perfect French drain, ensuring the interior would remain bone dry. Dr. Hemlock's pronouncements on dampness were a distant, foolish echo. The chamber itself was long and narrow, 12 feet wide and 40 feet deep. The walls were not left rough, but were smoothed with finer chisels until they had a polished, almost liquid feel. She was not just building a hole. She was crafting a space. She calculated the tonnage of the rock she moved. By summer's end, it was over 80 tons, all of it drilled, blasted, and hauled by one woman and one horse. She worked with a methodical, unwavering rhythm. There was no frenzy in her labor, no madness. There was only the calm, steady application of force and intelligence. She was a living refutation of the town's mockery, but they were too blind to see it. If you are enjoying this story, hit that hype button right now. It is free, it takes only a second, and it truly helps this video reach more people who need to hear it. By late September, the excavation was complete. Now came the construction. She hauled seasoned timber from the small copse behind her cabin, great, thick beams of pine that Elias had cut and stacked years before, knowing they would one day be needed. She framed a heavy door of double-layered oak, fitting it into the rock opening with a precision that would have made a master carpenter weep. Inside, she built shelves directly into the rock walls, lining them with smooth planks of cedar. She built a small, efficient stove against the back wall, venting it up through one of the pre-cut shafts. The final, most crucial part was the roof. She laid the massive pine beams across the top of the excavated chamber. On top of this, she layered sheets of treated oilcloth, followed by a thick layer of insulating sod, and finally, 6 feet of the earth she had first dug away. The widow's burrow disappeared. It blended back into the hillside, marked only by the single oak door and 2 stone-capped ventilation flues on the tor above. It looked as if it had always been there. While the town laughed, she had been building a masterpiece of thermodynamics and structural engineering. As autumn deepened, her work shifted from construction to preparation. She spent weeks harvesting. Every potato from her garden, every apple from her small orchard, every squash and bean. She filled the shelves of her new larder. Jars of preserved fruit glinted like jewels in the lantern light. Sacks of flour and beans were stacked high. Smoked hams and bacon hung from iron hooks. She had calculated the needs for one person for 6 months. Food, water, fuel. It was all there, safe in the belly of the mountain. Then, in the first week of October, she began to see the signs. The real signs. The ones from Elias's journals. The squirrels, usually bold and chattering, were gone. They had stripped every pine cone from the trees and vanished, their frantic preparations complete. A flock of snow geese, usually a late October sight, passed high overhead, flying south with a desperate, urgent speed she had never witnessed. They were a month early. A profound silence fell over the forest. The air grew still and heavy, carrying a strange, metallic scent, like the air before a lightning strike, but without the heat. She checked the barometer Elias had mounted by the cabin door. The needle had fallen to a level he had marked in red ink with a single word: unprecedented. She opened the journals to the final pages. He wrote of the great stillness, of the early departure of the birds, of the frantic industry of the small creatures. Nature is screaming its warning, he had written. Only man is deaf. Elara knew it was time. She spent one final day making her preparations. She brought Jasper into the burrow, into a small, hay-filled stall she had prepared for him at the very back. The old horse entered without hesitation, trusting her completely. She hauled in the last of the split, dry firewood, stacking it neatly by the small stove. She filled the last 2 water barrels from her well, the water so cold it hurt her hands. She stood for a moment outside the great oak door, looking down the valley at Prosperity Gulch. The lights of the town twinkled in the dusk, a small constellation of arrogant warmth. A part of her, a small, human part, wanted to go down there, to warn them, to scream at them until they listened. She imagined the scene. Her, the mad widow, bursting into the saloon with a wild prophecy of doom. She could already hear Silas Croft's booming laugh. She could see Dr. Hemlock's pitying smile and Mayor Thompson's weary sigh. They would not hear a warning. They would only hear madness. Her warning would be just one more chapter in the sad, amusing story of the widow's folly. She turned her back on the town lights. She stepped inside her sanctuary, the air cool and still. With a great heave, she pulled the heavy oak door shut. She slid 3 thick iron bolts into their stone sockets. The sound echoed in the chamber, a sound of finality. Then she sealed the edges of the door with strips of pitch-soaked felt, making it airtight. The world outside ceased to exist. The date was November 17th. The storm did not arrive. It struck. It came just after midnight, not as a gentle snowfall, but as a physical blow. A solid wall of wind and ice that hit the valley like a hammer. The temperature, which had been a mild 30 degrees at sunset, plunged to 40 below zero in less than an hour. It was a storm of a kind no one living had ever seen, a thing of mythic violence. The first casualty was Silas Croft's new barn. The state-of-the-art steel structure, designed for snow load but not for horizontal wind shear of 200 miles per hour, began to scream. The wind found a purchase under the eaves of the vast roof, and with a shriek of tearing metal, it peeled the entire structure off and sent it cartwheeling into the darkness. His prize-winning cattle, exposed in an instant to the impossible cold, were dead in minutes. In the town, windows shattered inward, spraying glass across living rooms. The grand clock on the town hall, a symbol of the town's orderly pride, froze solid. The frozen metal contracted, and the mainsprings snapped with a sound like a rifle shot. The power lines, coated in a sudden, thick layer of rime ice, grew heavy. They swayed violently, then snapped in a shower of blue sparks, plunging the town into absolute darkness. The town's conventional systems, the ones they had trusted, failed in a cascade of catastrophic collapses. The new water pump, powered by electricity, went silent. The pipes, no longer flowing, froze and burst within the hour. Houses built of timber and pride began to die. The wind forced its way through every crack, every seam. It was a tangible presence, a thief stealing every calorie of warmth. Roofs, designed to shed snow, could not withstand the sheer weight of the ice accumulating on them. The first one to go was on the Mercantile, collapsing inward with a great groan of splintering wood. Prosperity Gulch was being dismantled. It was being unmade by a force it had never imagined. Inside the widow's burrow, it was silent. Elara sat on a simple wooden stool, knitting by the light of a single lantern. The wind, which was tearing the world apart outside, was only a faint, distant hum, a vibration felt deep in the stone, rather than heard. She had lit a small fire in the stove, just 3 logs. The insulated chamber captured and held the heat perfectly. The temperature inside was a steady, comfortable 55 degrees. Jasper shifted in his stall, munching contentedly on his hay. Elara paused her knitting. She listened, not to the storm, but to the silence of her shelter. It was the sound of her vindication, the sound of her husband's wisdom, the sound of survival. She was warm. She was safe. She had food and water. The town had called her a fool for burrowing into the earth, but she had not buried herself. She had planted herself in the only soil that could withstand the storm. If this channel has become part of your week, please consider joining the channel membership to support our work. And if you have not already, hit that hype button. It means the world to us. For 3 days, the storm raged without pause. In the town, the situation grew desperate. The world was a white blur of blinding, suffocating snow. Drifts piled up, burying houses to their eaves. Families huddled together in the one remaining room they could keep warm, burning their furniture to stay alive. The food they had was frozen solid. The water was gone. The community, once so proud and self-assured, had broken down into isolated pockets of freezing, starving people. The first to break was Dr. Hemlock. His modern, well-built house with its state-of-the-art furnace had been his fortress of scientific living, but the furnace ran on electricity. When the power failed, it became a tomb of ice. After 2 days of shivering in the darkness, watching his wife and 2 small children begin to succumb to the cold, his intellectual arrogance shattered. He remembered the mad widow, the woman he had diagnosed with grief-induced hysteria. He remembered her burrow. Driven by a father's primal fear, he did the only thing he could. He wrapped his family in every blanket they owned and stumbled out into the storm. He could not see more than 3 feet in front of him. He navigated by memory, by the feel of the rising ground. It took him 2 hours to travel the 2 miles to Elara's land, a journey that nearly killed him. He fell against the great oak door, his hands too numb to knock. He could only scratch at the wood, his throat too frozen to shout. Inside, Elara heard the faint sound. She unbolted the door. It swung inward, and Dr. Hemlock collapsed at her feet, a half-frozen man, his family huddled behind him like terrified ghosts. His eyes, rimmed with ice, looked up at her. The pride was gone. The condescension was gone. There was only shame and a desperate, silent plea. Elara Vance looked down at the man who had publicly mocked her sanity. She said nothing. She simply stepped aside, held the lantern high, and ushered him and his freezing family into the warmth. She gave them hot broth. She gave them blankets. She gave them a place near the stove. There were no words of reproach, no "I told you so." There was only the quiet, profound charity of survival. Dr. Hemlock was the first. He was not the last. Wordlessly, he had shown the way. One by one, then family by family, the people of Prosperity Gulch began the desperate pilgrimage to the one place that offered hope. They came in a staggered, humbled procession. The gossips from the mercantile, The men who had laughed in the saloon, the women who had whispered on their porches. Each one arrived broken, defeated by the reality she had foreseen. And each one was met with the same silent, unconditional welcome. The Burrow filled with people. It became a crowded, humming ark. And in the center of it all was Elara. She was no longer the outcast, the fool. She was the quiet, undisputed authority. She organized them. She rationed the food, ensuring everyone had enough. She set up sleeping shifts. She showed them how her ventilation system worked, how the stove could heat the entire space with minimal fuel. She was not a mayor or a doctor, but she was their leader. Her authority came not from a title, but from the undeniable truth of her wisdom. The last to arrive were Mayor Thompson and Silas Croft. They came together, supporting the mayor's wife between them. They were the architects of her public humiliation, and their shame was the deepest. Silas Croft, the man of steel and money, had lost everything. His great barn was gone, his herd was gone, his wealth was meaningless against the cold. Mayor Thompson, the man of common sense and tradition, had presided over the near destruction of his town. They stood before her in the warm, crowded shelter, their faces a mask of utter defeat. "Elara," the mayor began, his voice a hoarse whisper. She raised a hand, stopping him. "There will be time for words later," she said, her voice calm and even. "Now, there is only survival. Bring your wife to the fire." For 12 more days, the storm continued. And for 12 days, 37 people lived together in the belly of the mountain, kept alive by the foresight of the one person they had all despised. When the thaw finally came, it was as dramatic as the storm's arrival. The sun broke through, the world dripped and melted, and the survivors of Prosperity Gulch emerged from the widow's burrow, blinking in the bright, unfamiliar light. Their town was a ruin, but they were alive. 2 weeks later, a town meeting was called. It was held in the nave of the church, the only large building with its roof mostly intact. Every survivor was there. Elara Vance sat alone in the front pew. Mayor Thompson, Dr. Hemlock, and Silas Croft walked to the front and stood before the small congregation. They did not stand at the pulpit. They stood on the floor, on the same level as everyone else. It was Mayor Thompson who spoke first. His voice was stripped of its usual bluster. It was the voice of a man hollowed out by his own failure. "I have been your mayor for 20 years, he said. "In all that time, I believed my first duty was to uphold the common sense and traditions of this town. I now see that my greatest failure was in my inability to recognize wisdom when it did not look or sound like my own." He turned and looked directly at Elara. "We laughed at you," he said, his voice cracking. "We named your work folly. We used your name as a synonym for madness. We were proud. We were arrogant. And we were fools." He took a deep breath. "You were right, and we were wrong. You saved us, and I, on behalf of this entire town, offer you our deepest, most humble apology." Silas Croft stepped forward. The big, booming man was gone. In his place was a subdued, broken figure. "My barn is gone," he said quietly. "My herd is gone. Everything I built with steel and money was swept away. It was all vanity. Your shelter, built of rock and earth and wisdom, it stands. I mocked you the loudest. My shame is the greatest. I am sorry." Finally, Dr. Hemlock spoke. I dismissed your knowledge with my own, he said, his words precise and clinical, but filled with emotion. I called your sanctuary unhealthy. I was wrong. My science was a shield from my own ignorance. You did not just save our bodies, Elara. You saved my children. There is no apology sufficient for that. The three men stood in silence, their public confession complete. The town waited. All eyes were on Elara. She rose slowly from the pew and walked to the front. She stood before them, a small, weathered woman who had become the fulcrum of their world. There is no need for apology, she said, and her voice filled the silent church. Apology is for pride. This was not about pride. It was about survival. She looked around at their faces. My husband taught me that the earth has a long memory. It remembers every storm, every fire, every flood. It writes its history in the stones. I did not have a vision. I simply read the page that was open. She paused, letting her words settle. Nature does not care about our buildings, our money, or our opinions. It offers lessons. We can choose to learn them, or we can choose to perish. The choice is ours. You have the knowledge, Mayor Thompson said. Will you teach us? Yes, Elara said simply. I will teach you. That was the day Prosperity Gulch began to be reborn. They did not rebuild as they had before. They rebuilt with wisdom. Under Elara's guidance, they began to build new homes, not of wood frames, but of earth and stone. They dug their foundations deep, creating earth-sheltered structures that were warm in winter and cool in summer. They built communal larders, vast burrows like Elara's, filled with enough food to last through any storm. The phrase, digging a Vance, was reborn. It no longer meant an act of folly. It became the highest compliment one could pay. It meant to act with uncommon foresight, to prepare with wisdom, to see the truth that others missed. When we silence those who warn us, we are not punishing them. We are punishing our own future. Share this story if you believe that true wisdom is often found in the quietest voices. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of what is truly important. And let us know in the comments, has anyone ever punished you for telling a truth they were not ready to hear? Elara Vance lived for another 40 years. She never moved from her burrow in the side of the Tor. She never remarried. She never fully rejoined the social fabric of the town with its dances and its church socials. Her place was at the edge, a permanent, revered outsider. She became their sage. People would make the walk to her door, not just for advice on building, but for counsel on all matters. Farmers sought her knowledge of the soil. Young couples asked for her blessing. The mayor, and every mayor after him, consulted her before any major decision was made for the town. She taught the children how to read the signs of nature, how to understand the language of the wind, the clouds, and the trees. She taught them the lessons from her husband's journals. She never spoke of the great storm or the town's mockery again. She did not have to. The proof of her wisdom was in the very stones of their new homes. She lived a quiet, solitary, and deeply respected life. She died peacefully in her sleep one spring morning at the age of 92. The entire town mourned her. They did not bury her in the town cemetery. They interred her in a small, stone-lined chamber near her burrow, a place of honor overlooking the valley she had saved. They placed a simple bronze plaque on the granite face above her old oak door. It was polished by the hands of generations of children who were told her story. It read, Elara Vance. She saw the truth in the earth. In her wisdom, we found our survival. Let us never again mistake silence for foolishness.